Mr. President.
The senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, I have 5 unanimous consent.
We're in a quorum call, Senator.
I ask to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have 5 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that he be allowed to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I also ask unanimous consent that following my statement, the Banking Committee's ranking member be recognized, followed by Senator Menendez of New Jersey, and that all time that may consume be counted towards the post-closure time.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm pleased to present the Banking Committee's Public Transportation Bill to the Senate as an amendment to the surface transportation legislation now before us. The transit bill was reported by our committee unanimously. Maintaining investment in our nation's transportation infrastructure is a priority of mine and of our committee. I want to thank our committee's ranking member, Senator Shelby, who has worked for a long time on this bill. Without his support, this bipartisan legislation would not be possible. I also want to thank our subcommittee chairman, Senator Menendez, and all of the other members of the committee that offered contributions to our product. With this bill, we have the opportunity to preserve public transportation funding for 2 years at current levels and deliver critical investments in the nation's aging transport infrastructure. In addition, the bill will institute much-needed reforms, such as eliminating earmarks and speeding the construction of public transportation projects. The bill also includes transit safety provisions that have been stalled for 2 years. These are important reforms that many senators have worked on. Now is the time to move them forward. Finally, our bill increases formula funding for all types of transit, additional urban and rural formula funds, new money for every state to address state of good repair needs, and more money for travel transit. Our nation's transit systems need more than $77 billion to address backlog repairs. This bill can address all of those needs, but it can ensure that our transit systems don't fall further behind, and transit funding will support more than 386,000 jobs. Mr. President, Americans make 35 million trips on public transit every weekday. Many of these trips are in our cities, but in places like South Dakota, Rural Transit Service connects seniors with their doctors and helps the workers travel long distances to get to jobs. Everyone benefits from public transportation, and I urge senators to support this bipartisan bill. I yield the floor to the ranking member of the Banking Committee.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I rise today in support of legislation to reauthorize the Surface Transportation Bill, and in particular, Mr. President, the Federal Public Transportation Act of 2012, which is the transit amendment before us today. Mr. President, while we're nearly 3 years beyond the September 2009 expiration date of safety, I'm pleased that we're finally moving one step closer to legislation that would allow infrastructure investments to move forward in this country. Chairman Johnson and I worked together to produce bipartisan legislation that eliminates outdated, inefficient programs and promotes greater efficiency and effectiveness in public transportation systems all across America. The Federal Public Transportation Act passed the Banking Committee with unanimous support. This legislation before us, reflected in the amendment currently under consideration, maintains funding for public transportation programs at $10.5 billion a year. Unlike previous reauthorization bills, the committee was unable to provide an increase in the baseline funding amount for public transportation. We were, however, Mr. President, able to provide a substantial increase to existing programs by eliminating the bus discretionary program, which previously contained earmarks totaling $984 million. In fact, Mr. President, we did not just eliminate one account that included earmarks. We eliminated all earmarks that were previously included in the reauthorization bill. Mr. President, these reforms have allowed us to provide public transportation systems with an increase in their guaranteed formula funding over the next 2 years. In addition to providing a stable source of funding, I believe that we must institute a system here that ensures greater accountability and encourages real investment in maintaining our aging public transportation infrastructure all over America. Mr. President, this issue, also known as state of good repair, is extremely important for public transportation, and this amendment before us makes it an integral part of the transit programs. The New Starts process has undergone significant reforms in order to streamline and to improve delivery of capital investment projects. It also includes a new pilot project with the sole purpose of expediting project approval and attracting private investment. Setting aside for a moment the specific issues related to this amendment, I want to speak briefly to what I believe is the most significant issue surrounding the reauthorization of safety, the solvency, that is, of the Highway Trust Fund. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the mass transit account of the Highway Trust Fund will end 2013 with $2.8 billion, $6 billion short of what it will need, Mr. President, to continue to meet its obligations resulting from this reauthorization bill before us. And while the Senate is considering a 2-year authorization bill, others have advocated a longer-term reauthorization. The length of the reauthorization is not as important, however, as the need to pay for all of this spending before us. I believe that most Americans would agree that a reauthorization bill that leaves the program insolvent or near insolvency upon its expiration would be irresponsible. I hope this is not what we're doing with this bill here, Mr. President. Infrastructure spending is essential to our long-term economic stability and growth in this country. Nevertheless, this country cannot continue to deficit spend the way out of its problems for infrastructure or anything else. Therefore, Mr. President, I think we must begin this discussion with the realization that difficult decisions are going to have to be made. And for our part, I believe that the Banking Committee has begun to make some of these difficult decisions by providing level funding and eliminating unnecessary earmarks from the program structures. I look forward to continue this debate and moving one step closer to completing a responsible and paid-for reauthorization bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
President.
The senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, let me begin by recognizing the hard work and dedication of my friend from South Dakota, Chairman Johnson, for his tireless leadership on this legislation that made it possible to happen. Let me also recognize the ranking member, Senator Shelby, for his efforts to work in an incredibly positive, cooperative, and bipartisan manner that, in fact, created the ultimate result of a unanimous bipartisan vote, something that we'd love to see more of these days. And it was his work along with the chairman's that got us to that point. I'm glad to have added to that as the subcommittee chair as well. Mr. President, millions of Americans take over 10 billion transit trips a year. Now, it's taken over 2 years of hard work and is part of an overall bill that creates or saves 2 million jobs, but those trips and the jobs that get created by it and the opportunity of people to get to employment, to get to a hospital, to go see family and friends are incredibly important in the context of our national economy. At a time when job creation is essential, it invests in every state to keep us competitive as a nation in a global marketplace. Under this legislation, for example, my home state of New Jersey stands to receive about $519 million in federal transit funding without any increase in federal spending. This bill cuts waste and eliminates earmarks so that New Jersey will see benefits from a $63 million increase in transit funding, more transit funding than in any previous year. This bill invests in our infrastructure and improves public transportation without increasing the federal budget. And it provides more funds to make the improvements states need to ease congestion and mitigate transportation delays. It's good for America because it will help communities concentrate on smart growth around transit hubs that mirror my Livable Communities Act and my state's Transit Village program that will help make New Jersey attractive to businesses and a model job creation hub. It can do that for other communities throughout the nation. It's good because it's energy smart and increases competitive funding for clean fuel transit vehicles to help agencies switch from dirty, expensive fuels to cleaner, cheaper fuels. And it not only streamlines the process for federal approval of new transit projects, but it will help upgrade older systems by adding a new station or another track or a bigger train car to increase capacity rather than having to build new systems from scratch. It also includes a provision establishing a program to allow public transportation providers temporary flexibility during periods of high unemployment to use a limited portion of their federal funds for up to 2 years, provided they meet the established criteria for operating expenses. And one last but perhaps the most important thing the bill accomplishes, it provides for a strong federal role in transit safety oversight by establishing a national public transportation safety plan to improve the safety of all public transportation systems that receive federal funding. Under this legislation, the Secretary will develop minimum performance standards for vehicles used in public transportation and establish a training program for federal and state employees who conduct safety audits of public transportation systems. Fundamentally, this bill improves the effectiveness of state safety oversight agencies and increases federal funding for safety and provides new enforcement authority over public transportation safety to the Secretary of Transportation. At the end of the day, making our transit system as safe as humanly possible in every state, from coast to coast, must be a national priority. So let me conclude, Mr. President, by saying once again, thanks to Senators Johnson and Shelby for their leadership for the last 2 years. I think the bill is a victory for every American community. It's a common-sense investment that will create jobs, keep this nation competitive, make our communities more productive, accessible, and livable. It's a victory for those who believe that we can create jobs, get people back to work, and keep us on the cutting edge of a global economy. So now we need to make sure that we continue to reach across the aisle, as the chairman, the ranking member, and I have done during this process, and get this investment in America's future to the President's desk and sign into law as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m.
And the Senate is in recess so that senators can attend their weekly party meetings. We're expecting the Senate to reconvene at 2:15 p.m. Eastern. The Senate